about gender inequality and its influence in the society. Gender means the social, cultural and psychological patterning of differences between male and female. Gender inequality refers to unequal treatment between men and women. It is a result of the persistent discrimination of one group of people on the other based upon gender. Sociologically, the word gender refers to the socio-cultural definition of man and women. The way societies distinguish men and women and assign them social roles. Inequality in gender is basically the discrimination from the male against the female in all kinds of opportunities. It could be at home, at workplace, in education, in healthcare and in living. It is furthermore considered a causal factor of violence against women. While gender discrimination happens to both men and women in individual situations, discrimination against women is deep-rooted and global epidemic. India is one of the countries across the world which has the lowest and the declining gender ratio. It is in general 940 females against 1000 males as per the 2012 census. If it is compared with the global sex ratio and the sex ratios of other countries, particularly the Asian countries, it is the lowest. Gender inequality is interlinked with social and economic forms of inequalities. It is present in every household. It is because of the mindset of Indian people. Suppose in a family with both male and female exists. The male child enjoys all the best in food, clothing, living and education, whereas the female child is treated as a burden. The marriage expenses and dowry has to be taken care of by the girl's parents. The male child is treated well, thinking he would be the caretaker of the parents during their old age. Reason for the inequality in India. The reality of gender inequality in India is very complex and diversified because it is present in many ways, many fields and many classes. In Indian society, the birth of a son is celebrated, the birth of a daughter is filled with pain. Sons are showered with love, respect, better food and proper health care. Boys are encouraged to be tough and outgoing. Girls are encouraged to be homebound and shy. All these differences are gender differences and they are created by the society. It is the patriarchal system followed in India which is to be blamed for this kind of discrimination. There have been efforts to break the mold and provide space for the female membership in the joint family and equal share in the family property among the female and male descendants. But in spite of this, the female exclusion, discrimination, subordination has continued because the patriarchal values have gone deeper into the humankind. The male child alone can perform the funeral rites to bring peace to the deceased parents and make them immortal. This is the privilege bestowed upon male alone. It is here that the social basis of gender inequality and unfair gender discrimination germinates. The birth of a male child has become a social necessity which increased female feticide. The status of women in India has been subject to many great changes over the past few millenniums. From equal status with men in ancient times through the low points of the medieval period to the promotion of equal rights by many reformers, the history of women in India has been eventful. Politics plays a central role in the interests, institutions and ideas that are needed to reshape social welfare and gender inequality in politics and society limits government's ability to act on economic incentives. There are still larger gender disparities in basic human rights, resources, economic opportunity and in political rights. However, women in India continue to face violence such as rape, as throwing and dowry killings while young girls are forced into prostitution. As of late, rape has seen a sharp increase in cases of young girls brutally raped in public areas. It would be interesting for us to know when this inequality has started. According to studies, women enjoyed equal status and rights during the early Vedic period. However, in approximately about 500 BC, the status of women began to decline with the Smritis and with the Islamic invasion of Babur and the Mughal Empire, and Christianity later curtailing women's freedom and rights. Although reform movements such as Jainism allowed women to be admitted to religious orders, by and large, women in India faced confinement and restriction. In modern India, women have held high offices including that of President, Prime Minister, Speaker of the Lok Sabha and Leader of the Opposition. Influence on economy. No nation, no society, no community can hold its head high and claim to be part of a civilized world if it condones the practice of discriminating against one half of humanity represented by women. Gender inequality has adverse impact on development goals and reduces economic growth. It hampers the overall well-being because blocking women from participation in social, political and economic activities can adversely affect the whole society. Invest in human capital is one of the most effective means of reducing poverty and encouraging sustainable development. Yet, women receive less education compared to her male counterparts. Women also get less employment opportunities due to household and family issues. This in turn has impact over the economy of the country. A critical aspect of gender inequality involves unequal access to economic resources and positions. This relationship becomes clearer in more advanced societies where economic organization has become established law different from relationship and political organizations. Sometimes this unequal economic access is understood as an expression of gender inequality, sometimes a cause of gender inequality, sometimes a result. Many analyses consider it all the three. High education levels and social integration significantly improve the productivity of all members of the household and improve equity throughout the society. Gender equity indices seek to provide the tools to demonstrate this feature of poverty. Inequality of gender at workplace. Inequality exists when workers are equally qualified and perform the same work, but one group of workers is paid more than the other. Women are highly underrepresented on boards of directors and in senior positions in the private sector. As women entered the workforce in larger numbers, occupations have become segregated based on the amount of femininity or masculinity supposed to be associated with each occupation. Census data suggests that while some occupations have become more gender integrated, like mail carriers, bartenders, bus drivers, and real estate agents, occupations including teachers, nurses, secretaries, and librarians have become female dominated, while occupations including architects, electrical engineers, and airplane pilots remain predominantly male in composition. Based on the census data, women occupy the service sector jobs at higher rates than men. Women's overrepresentation in service sector jobs, as opposed to jobs that require managerial work, acts as a reinforcement of women and men into traditional gender roles that causes gender inequality. These days, women in India have stormed all male aspects, be it piloting aircraft, heading multinational corporations, holding top bureaucratic positions, leading industrial houses, making a mark as photographers, filmmakers, chefs, engineers, and even as train and lorry drivers. Women have made it to all previously considered male-dominated in India. For the number of girls and women who have been left out of education and employment opportunities still far outweighs those who have got them. And what need to change this scenario are not just governmental efforts, but a change in societal norms, in cultural and traditional influences, and in general mindsets of people. And in this media, the civil society and the youth, the women and the girls have a lot to contribute. Inequality of gender at home. Despite the increase in women in the labor force in modern times, traditional gender roles are still prevalent in Indian society. Women are usually expected to put their educational and career goals on hold in order to raise children while their husbands work. However, there are women who choose to work as well as fulfill their gender role of cleaning the house and taking care of the children. Despite the fact that different households may divide chores more evenly, this is evidence that supports that women have retained the primary caregiver role within familial life despite contributions economically. This evidence suggests that women who work outside the home often put an extra 18 hours a week doing household or child care related chores as opposed to men who average 12 minutes a day in childcare activities. In addition to a lack of interest in the home on the part of some men, some women may bar men from equal participation in the home, which may contribute to this disparity. Inequality of gender in education. Education is widely recognized as the gateway to economic security and opportunity, particularly for girls and women. Urban women have good access to education, whereas the rural women, who form 80% of the female population, are denied from getting educated. There are many factors which hinder them, like lack of facilities, financial conditions, social, cultural, and regional aspects. Only 54% of Indian women are illiterate as compared to 76% of men. Some studies have documented that in villages in India, women are often discouraged to seek education. However, recent studies document remarkable success in efforts to improve girls' primary education. However, when it comes to secondary education, girls are still disadvantaged. Moreover, women employment rates are still low and seem to have further declined in recent years. Recent studies also document unequal access to and control over family resources for Indian women, including control over land and bank accounts, as well as severe limitations on their geographical mobility. In the rural areas, the girl children are made to perform household and agricultural chores. This is one of the main factors limiting girls' education. Cleaning the house, preparing the food, looking after their siblings, the elderly and the sick, grazing the cattle, and collecting firewood are some of the key tasks they have to perform. Households are therefore reluctant to spare them for schooling. Physical safety of the girls, especially when they have to travel a long distance to school, and fear of sexual harassment are other reasons that obstruct girls' education. The other factor limiting female education is poverty. Economics plays a key role when it comes to coping with direct costs such as tuition fees, cost of textbooks, uniforms, transportation, and other expenses. Wherever, especially in families with many children, these costs exceed the income of the family, girls are the first to be denied schooling. In the urban areas, however, there is a noticeable difference in the opportunities that girls get for education and employment. Lack of education has forced many women into the risky informal economy as street traders, domestic servants, home workers, and seasonal laborers. This, in turn, reflects a continuing belief that there is little benefit in educating a girl when she could be working in the marketplace or fields. Though the figures for girls would still be low as compared to boys, what is heartening to see is that whenever given the opportunity, girls have excelled more than boys. But the number of girls who have been left out of education still far outweigh those who have got them. Inequality of gender over property inheritance. Women suffer from unfair and biased inheritance and divorce laws. These laws prevent women from accumulating substantial financial assets, making it difficult for women to establish their own security and autonomy. The origin of the Indian idea of appropriate female behavior can be traced to the rules laid down by Manu in 200 BC. by a young girl, by a young woman, or even by an aged one. Nothing must be done independently, even in her own house. In childhood, a female must be subject to her father, in youth to her husband, when her lord is dead to her sons. A woman must never be independent. Unequal succession practices and laws. Dealing with after-death property distribution not controlled by a will set up a deliberate disparity between the amount of inheritance received by a woman and the amount inherited by a man. Although such laws often entitle a wife or a daughter to some property after the death of a husband or male relative, the laws discriminate against women by entitling a daughter only to half the inheritance that a son would receive, giving male relatives or spouses the right to administer women's wealth, requiring estates to distribute property only after consulting male beneficiaries, or prohibiting women from owning certain types of property. Many of the feminist economist analyses have further demonstrated that households and individual well-being are not necessarily the same. Individuals living in the same household may have very different control over the household income and assets. The lack of control over income and assets shows how economic inequality accumulated over the life course of individuals impacts on women's lower wages. This cripples their economic agency and decision making to manage and innovate with assets. Lack of ownership and controlled rights to productive assets is linked to negative development outcomes, especially in relation to gender inequality and inclusive economic growth. However, relatively little research has been done on the gendered distribution of productive assets and to determine how intra-household asset distribution affects women's economic security, limits their confidence and impacts productivity. Equal rights to productive assets of women with those of men can lead to greater economic activity and change in the perception of dependence on men, thus result in substantially reducing omission of women from social processes and promote development of diverse capabilities, thereby enhancing productivity and reducing inequality. Inequality of gender in healthcare. Women face discrimination right from the childhood. Gender disparities in nutrition are evident from infancy to adulthood. In fact, gender has been the most statistically significant determinant of malnutrition among young children, and malnutrition is a frequent, direct or underlying cause of death among girls below age 5. Girls are breastfed less frequently and for a shorter duration in infancy. In childhood and adulthood, males are fed first and better. Adult women consume approximately 1,000 fewer calories per day than men according to one estimate. Nutritional deprivation has two major consequences for women. They never reach their full growth potential and suffer from anemia, which are risk factors in pregnancy. This condition complicates childbearing and results in women and infant deaths and low birth weight infants. Women receive less healthcare facilities than men. A primary way that parents discriminate against their girl children is through neglect during illness. As an adult, they tend to be less likely to admit that they are sick and may wait until their sickness has progressed far before they seek help or help is sought for them. Many women in rural areas die in childbirth due to easily preventable complications. Women's social training to tolerate suffering and the reluctance to be examined by male personnel are additional constraints in their getting adequate health care. Declining female ratio. Manu writes that according to the tradition, the fulfillment of dharma, the inheritance of family property and the performance of family shraddha can be done only by the father, who is the head of the family, and after him only by the eldest son, because it is the male child alone who is by birth endowed with economic, religious and spiritual merits. It is here that the gender inequality and eminence of the male person originates in the patriarchal tradition. As a result, the necessity to obtain a son, preferably the first male child for inheritance, for marriage and for procreation, became an inevitable social necessity. Thus, this necessity became the most cherished desire of the parents. The sacred values of the male child gradually became so acceptable that it slowly superseded the sacramental value of the female child. The deaths of young girls in India exceed those of young boys by over 300,000 each year, and every sixth infant death is specifically due to gender discrimination. The study conducted by an association in India indicates that when the first male child is born, there is no discrimination against the next child, even if it happens to be a female baby. The gender ratio remains as high as 959 female children per 1,000 male children. But when the first female child is born, the second female childbirth is discriminated against for want of a male child. The gender ratio declines to 542. In case when both the first children are female, the ratio is shockingly as low as 219 female babies per 1,000 male babies. The only reason for this is the importance being given by the parents to the patriarchal value of gender preference traditionally handed over to the society and adopted into the individual mind. Scope for improvement. The Constitution of India ensures gender equality in its preamble as a fundamental right, but also empowers the state to adopt measures of positive discrimination in favor of women by ways of legislation, reservations, and policies. India has also approved various international conventions and human rights forums to secure equal rights of women, such as approval of Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 1993. Women have been finding place in local governance structures, overcoming gender biases. Over 1 million women have been elected to local panchayats as a result of 1993 amendment to the Indian Constitution requiring that 1/3 of the elected seats to the local governing bodies be reserved for women. The passing of Prenatal Diagnostic Tech Act in the year 1994 also is a step in removing gender discrimination. This act seeks to end sex determination tests and female feticide and prohibits doctors from conducting such procedures for the specific purpose of determining the sex of the fetus. The government also announced the National Policy for Empowerment of Women in 2001 to bring out advancement, development, and empowerment of women. The government has also drawn up a draft national policy for the empowerment of women, which is a policy statement outlining the state's response to problems of gender discrimination. As persistent gender inequalities continue, we need to rethink concepts and strategies for promoting women's dignity and rights. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan has stated, "Gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It is a precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance." There is a need for new kinds of institutions incorporating new norms and rules that support equal and just relations between women and men. Today, women are organizing themselves to meet the challenges that are hampering their development. Another opportunity to tackle gender inequality is presented by modern information and communication technologies. In a carefully controlled study, it has been shown that women embrace digital technology more than men, disproving the stereotype of technophobic women. Digital information and communication technologies have the potential to provide access to employment, education, income, health services, participation, protection, and safety. The natural affinity of women with these new communication tools provide women with an opportunity to tackle social discrimination. Conclusion. In other words, if women are provided with modern information and communication technologies, these digital tools present to them an opportunity to fight long-standing inequalities in the workplace and at home. Thus, it is rightly said, man and women are like two wheels of a carriage. The life of one without the other is incomplete. Gender equality strengthens a country's ability to grow, to reduce poverty and provide its people, men, women and children a better life. Just because a gender inequality is inextricably linked to societal norms, religion or cultural traditions, it should not be either a deterrent or an excuse to gender-sensitive development planning. India needs to grow in